Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It is so wonderful to have you here. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Samantha and I am the knitter and knitwear designer behind the Strikketjek. On this channel we talk about lots and lots of knitting, lots of yarn, life in the Arctic Circle of Tromsø, which is where I live. And today all of those three things are going to intersect into a very fun video, for me to film at least, that is a yarn store tour of Tromsø. So a lot of people had been asking, because I think especially last summer I was sharing a lot of little tidbitty videos about Tromsø because it was so pretty, all the Arctic beaches in the summer, and they wanted to see more of Tromsø, and I was like, let's just combine this into a yarn store tour with little snippets of Tromsø in the winter, which is just as magical, if a little bit more unbearable to walk around in because of the cold, and let's do some yarn shopping while we're at it. It's a pretty small city. So like the stores that I'm going to show you, I think they're in about like just a couple kilometers of a radius away from each other, but we're actually quite privileged to have such a good selection of yarn, and a lot of it being local Norwegian yarn, and our stores are really good at stocking and selling that yarn for a really reasonable price. So I am excited to show you all of the yarn that I saw and did not buy, most of it, in this video. And it's mostly just going to be me talking and like footage that I filmed because there was a lot of activity going on in the yarn stores while I was there, so I hope you don't mind present me talking over past me in the yarn stores. There are three main ones that we are going to see today. There's Bundingen, which is the yarn store that's it's in our main shopping mall. And then there's Snarby Strikkestudio, which is my main local yarn store. It's the one that I go to the most just because they're very centrally located and they have a huge selection of yarn. And then there's also the Nordstrfid, which is up in Tromsø, which I actually had never been to before, but I popped in to see what they had to offer and was not disappointed at all. So yes, without further ado, let's get into it and go on a very chilly but very rewarding yarn store tour of Tromsø. So the first yarn store that I went to, and I brought my boyfriend along to all of these yarn stores with me, both to record me looking at yarn, fangirling over yarn, and also to stop me from buying a lot of yarn. So he's the cameraman. But Bundingen is a store that I have been going to more and more frequently. It's very conveniently located in the Jekta shopping center, which is like the main shopping mall on the Tromsø island. And they stock quite a lot of yarn. They have a huge wall that's just covered in Rowan, which Rowan is a Norwegian yarn manufacturer. They have a factory somewhere further south than Tromsø in Norway, where they produce all of their wool, and actually quite a few independent Norwegian dyers. They use Rowan as their dyeing base because it's pretty affordable to buy and hand dye that yarn. They also stock Noro silk yarn, which is what Petite Knit used for her sample of the terrazzo sweater. It's an extremely popular, coveted yarn, but it does run kind of pricey up here in our store. It's about 300 NOK, which is like $30 per skein of yarn, which is quite a bit, but it is tempting. And they also stock a lot of løpi yarn, like Letløpi and Alfas løpi, which is just really, really nice Icelandic yarn that is specifically tailored to outdoor sweaters, or as we call them in Norway, turgensers, which you can wear when you're hiking, when you're skiing, camping, and they do a great job at keeping you warm, and they're a little bit scratchy, so you want to have like a couple base layers underneath them, so that especially helps really seal in the heat for you on very cold hiking days. They are a Rowan flagship store. So as I kind of mentioned when I was talking to you guys about the Menlo sweater, that I had bought a lot of Rowan felted tweed in the shade Pine from Lovecrafts because it was on sale. And I thought as I was getting closer to the end of that sweater that I was going to run out of yarn and that I could potentially buy it at Bundingen, but that the Rowan felted tweed there was about $18 a skein, so I wasn't very motivated to do that. But they do have a huge selection of Rowan yarn, and the one that I am being drawn to at the moment, you can probably see in the literal heart eyes coming out of my face in this video, is the Rowan brushed fleece, which is just a lovely, lovely blend of alpaca and wool, and it's just, I think I've been attracted to a lot of different blow yarns to try, just because I want to branch out from Drops Air and just see what else is out there, and Rowan brushed fleece is definitely one that I want to cast on with at some point during the year. They are also a huge retailer for Knitting for Olive. So they have a huge wall of just Knitting for Olive merino, and then they have a similar wall of Knitting for Olive soft silk mohair and compatible cashmere. This was actually the first place I went to buy Knitting for Olive yarn. I bought the heavy merino from them, and it was just so wonderful to work with, so I definitely see myself coming back and getting more. The Rowan yarn was just, I mean, part of it is just the colors. I like that it's kind of more of a speckly yarn. Not in the way that it's very obvious, but it's just like it has a little bit of variegation in it that just makes it really interesting and gives it some good depth. That I think would look really nice, because with blown yarns you don't have a lot of stitch definition, so if it's all one single color and if it's not heathered at all, you can't really, I don't know, it looks a bit boring. It doesn't have as much surface interest. But this yarn was it reminded me a bit of the Milky Way colorway in Letlöpi, where it's just a little bit purplish, a little bit blue, and just interesting to work up and knit with. Well, my favorite thing about Bundingen, so actually Bundingen hosts quite a few knitting cafes. They started, I think they used to do it before COVID, but they started up again afterwards. And so I think it's every 3 months or 4 months, or it's not very frequent, but they will host these knitting nights in the shopping center that's kind of near Bundingen, not in the store itself, but you can get together with a lot of people from Tromsø and you can just bring whatever you're knitting on, buy some snacks at the cafe. There are people from Bundingen who work there, and they give out discount codes while you're there so that you can use them and buy yarn that same day, and they also give out a couple prizes and stuff, so it's like a whole fun experience and just, yeah, very nice to be a part of. So after Bundingen, we headed over to the Tromsø city center, which is where Snarby Strikkestudio and the Husflid are both located. Snarby Strikkestudio is actually the first yarn store that I ever went to, because I started knitting when I moved to Tromsø. So I remember walking in as a very, very new knitter and being very overwhelmed with the selection of yarn and not knowing anything about yarn weights or fibers. So I mean, I kind of feel the change when I walk in there. It has a special place in my heart because that was where I was kind of like a little lost duckling wandering around. And now I'm like, yes, I know to check dye lots. You don't have to ask me about that now anymore. But Snarby, they have a huge selection of yarn from different manufacturers. I go here because it's a drops retailer, and especially as a poor student, that is most of the yarn that I used to buy. So it was just really nice to be able to get in there and see the colors up close and personal, touch the yarn before buying it and having it sent to me. They also have a huge selection of Sandnes Garn, which is another Norwegian yarn company that I have been getting into more and more, and I really want to try to use more of this year. And Sandnes Garn, they have, I mean, just every kind of yarn that they produce imaginable, but the kinds that I like the most are probably their tin silk mohair and their Sunday yarn, which is a lovely combination, and you can get, I mean, it's not on par with Knitting for Olive's different colorways, the number of options they have there, but it is quite a nice, durable yarn that it feels similarly luxurious, but it's also a little bit more hard wearing, and that's what I like about it. They have a lot of yarn from the Hillesvåg Ullvarefabrik, which is a Norwegian wool yarn and factory. They have some really nice rustic yarns that I have really been wanting to get more into. The kind that I have tried so far has been Varda, which is a really good substitute actually for Quint & Co. Owl that I used on my Maryland Heights sweater design. Snarby also carries a lot of Untold Yarn, which is a new yarn brand actually. They are a Norwegian yarn brand, but they're kind of like, so I feel like there are two different kinds of Norwegian yarn retailers, right? There's companies like Hillesvåg and Rauma, which are very much into traditional rustic-y yarn and very kind of vintagey looking patterns, and that's their aesthetic. And then there's yarns like Hip Wool and Untold, which are very bright and colorful, and they kind of embrace I think they're more like an 80s type of look when they produce their patterns and they produce their yarn colors, and it's very clearly aimed at younger people. And so I really like Untold for that, because I love their bright, vibrant colors, and I love their color matching that they do between their merino and their silk mohair. I think it stands up to Knitting for Olive's color matching, honestly. It's just, it works so well together. And so that's some yarn that I am really itching to get my hands on this year. And my boyfriend stopped me when we were in Snarby shopping, but I will definitely come back and I will buy Untold yarn and probably cast on something with the combination of the merino and the soft silk mohair. I think that what I'm going to make with the Untold yarn would probably be, because this is my problem, right? Whenever I buy yarn, I go for sweaters quantities worth of yarn. So it'll probably end up being a sweater or a cardigan because I don't buy accessory quantities of yarn. And if there's any left over, then I'll make an accessory with it, but I don't go into a store going, I'm going to make socks with this. So it will probably be, and I think I want to design something out of it, but that could always change because I really just want to get my hands on the yarn and see what it feels like knitting it up. But yeah, I have a lot of yarn that I've said I'm going to design something with it right now. So that it might end up being a Semper sweater by the Knit Pearl Girl, because that just seems like a really nice comforting knit that lets the yarn shine and doesn't really have a lot of complicated stitch texturing to kind of detract from the yarn. So that might be a good option for the Untold yarn. My favorite thing about Snarby is I just love the selection that Snarby has. I like how they have really expensive yarns. You can go in there and you can buy, Untold is quite expensive, and in price range it's similar to Knitting for Olive. And they do have some hand-dyed yarns that you would pay a lot for each hank, but then they also have drops. So it has something for every knitter that goes in, for every kind of budget. And their staff is very helpful. I'm too awkward to ask for help. I'm like, I would much rather just do my Googling beforehand and then go in and just not talk to anyone because that's just, social anxiety. But I have seen them being very, very helpful to new knitters around the store and helping them find patterns and yarn to fit the pattern, or something within their budget if the recommended yarn is too expensive, or I mean, they're just very willing to step in and give you advice and share their wealth of knowledge, and that to me just seems it's above and beyond for the employees who work there. And I bought so many little accessories from Snarby. I love their button selection. I love, they carry Jukelan wool wash, so I have snagged that up. I love that they have affordable knitting needles. So there's just, I mean, you can go in there for whatever you want knitting related and you will find it. And that's what I love most about Snarby. The last store on our knitting shop of Tromsø tour is the Nordstrfid, which I had never been in before, but it was quite a pleasant surprise. They had a huge selection of yarn in there. Not Snarby level huge, but it was still pretty big for a store that doesn't only sell yarn. The Nordstrfid is more of it's a traditional Norwegian feature. They actually make and sell the bunad packs, and I think they might even be able to make you a finished bunad. The bunad is the Norwegian cultural dress. That I'll stick a little picture of it in here. They wear it for the 17th of May, which is the Norwegian National Day. They wear it for weddings sometimes, graduations, just important events. So confirmations is the first time you get to wear a bunad. So that's really cool that that's kind of the official manufacturer of the Norwegian bunad. And they have a lot of other little handcrafts in the store, like candles and woodworking and that kind of stuff. But yarn actually had a really nice dedicated section of the store. And they sold quite a bit of yarn. Again, they had a lot of Rauma yarn, which seems to be something that every Norwegian wool store carries. I don't know if that's not necessarily the case, but every single Norwegian wool store I have been in certainly has carried a lot of Rauma yarn. And they also had a few finished samples in the store, which was pretty cool to see, just of different yarn options that they had. And they had them like really nicely presented so you could see the possibilities that you can make out of different kinds of yarn. They had a really big button selection as well, quite a few shiny buttons and then just wooden ones and all kinds. And I paid a lot of attention here because when I was shopping, I was looking for buttons for a cardigan I had just finished. So that was important for me to be able to grab some of those. I didn't find what I was looking for, but we got really close. They had a very remarkable selection. They also had Hillesvåg Ullvarafabrik yarn that they carried in store as well. It was mostly Norwegian yarns. So Bundingen and Snarby carried a lot of Danish yarns or German yarns, just yarns that weren't kind of made and dyed and manufactured in Norway, but Bundingen was it seemed like it was almost exclusively Norwegian yarn. And that was actually a kind of cool experience as well, just to see how much different yarn Norway actually produces. And it's a huge industry really when you think about it, for a relatively small country to have so many different yarn manufacturers and so many different kinds of yarn, and then just the kind of choice that you have. It's incredible. So I loved that about Hillesvåg. I love how it felt just cozy compared to the other yarn stores as well. And then it's also kind of, in a way, it was like everyone that was shopping for yarn kind of was an experienced veteran knitter. So you didn't have a lot of people kind of wandering in who would need a lot of help. So you didn't see a lot of employees around. It was silent. You just got to go in, do your shopping, do your own thing, admire the yarn, admire the patterns that they had on display. That was really fun to do. It's hard to pinpoint something that we're missing from the Tromsø yarn stores. I think that Norwegian yarn stores, or at least the ones up in Tromsø, are very, very wool focused. You will find a lot of wool, a lot of alpaca, mohair. Occasionally you'll find cotton, linen, silk, those kind of yarns. Not nearly as much, because obviously the Norwegian industry focuses mainly around wool, because that's what you need to wear almost year-round here. So if you were looking for a plant-based alternative, I think that would be pretty hard to find. Just because you would see the huge, wonderful selection of wool, and then you'd be like, okay, but I have this corner. So I assume that wouldn't feel as nice. And then also for people with wool sensitivities, you would be a little bit out of luck, because it's mostly wool. And if it's not wool, it's a plant-based fiber. So you're not going to find a lot of acrylic yarns or synthetic yarns at the yarn stores up here, at least. It's all natural. So that could be a bit of a drawback to those of you who don't like wool. So there are more yarn stores, obviously, in my immediate vicinity that I didn't talk about. These three were the big ones: Bundingen, Snarby, and the Husflid. And that's just like on Tromsø Island, right? Because we have an island called Tromsø that we live on. That's the main city. And then you have a bridge over to an island called Kvaløya, which is a pretty big island towards the sea, and then the mainland. And you have a lot of yarn stores on the mainland as well. You'll find yarn in all kinds of places that you don't expect to find it. You'll find it in Søstrene, which is like a small knick-knack store in the mall. You find yarn in the grocery store sometimes. There's yarn everywhere, but these are the dedicated yarn stores. And I had a lot of fun going around shopping for yarn, and I was reined in by my boyfriend, so I did not actually buy the amount of yarn that I think I probably would have emerged with if I were by myself. But I do have to show you the spoils of my yarn store tour. So I have it beside me. This is, we're gonna go in order. So this is what I got from Bundingen. It is Rowan Island Fine Blend. Island Blend Fine. They had it on sale. I almost walked out of Bundingen without buying anything, and then this was right by the door. So I ended up leaving with one skein of Island Blend Fine, which is a mix of Falkland Fine Merino wool, baby alpaca, and silk. And it's a 50 gram, I think this is a hank. This is a 50 gram hank. And you get 165 meters in the 50 gram hank, and they recommend it for use on 3 1/4 millimeter needles, which is kind of an odd needle size to recommend because I only find needle sizes in halves, like 3, 3.5, 4. So we'll swatch and see what works for this, but I'm thinking it can be a really nice addition to a colorwork sweater. It's just so soft and not itchy. It feels really nice, so maybe it could be a hat. We'll see. The possibilities are endless. At Nordstrfid, so I've kind of worked through a lot of the yarn that I bought at Nordstrfid because I went there specifically for yarn for the Farnham sweater test knit by the Knit Pearl Girl, and once I started that pattern I could not put it down, so I have worked through pretty much all of the yarn that I bought at Nordstrfid, except for this one last skein of Drops Kid Silk that I got. Ooh, and the tag is falling off, but it is, yeah, it's Drops Kid Silk. It's a blend of silk and mohair, and it's the cheapest silk mohair yarn that any of the Tromsø yarn stores sell. So that's what I wanted to go for something that was a little bit more budget friendly for my silk mohair alternative, and I went for the Drops because the Drops feels very, very nice. But yeah, it's not as heavy on your wallet, so it was a good follow thread for my project. And then we have yarn from Husflid that my boyfriend has already started working with, kind of. This is Rauma, I want to say it's Lamul's Garn. So this is a lamb wool alternative to their Finull, but it's about the same kind of thickness. It's a very, very thin yarn. It's recommended for use on like 2.5 millimeter needles. And so he decided to hold it double on 4 millimeter needles, and he's been swatching up a little bit until I stole his 4 millimeter needles for my Farnham sweater test knit. And it's a lovely, lovely baby blue color. I actually pointed out the color, and then he was like, "Oh, I like that. I think I'm going to make something out of it." So yes, we'll see. Maybe on another knit and chat, we'll see what Kevin does with this yarn. So I'm excited to see for sure, and I think it would look really good as a hat. So we got a lot of hat yarn, and this is right after me saying I don't buy yarn for accessories, but also I had Kevin with me, so it's not like I could pick up a sweater's quantity of yarn, right? I have to go alone for that to happen. So I'll definitely have that to show you on future acquisitions. Yeah, and then he will watch the videos when he's editing them and make fun of me for it, but that's okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed a little yarn store tour of Tromsø and just a little bit of footage of Tromsø in the winter. It is nice how much cheer they put up to kind of detract from the fact that it was the dark time, 24 hours of darkness, because everyone does get really into Christmas and the holiday spirit. It's just a lovely time to be out and about shopping, and everyone's kind of happy and, yeah, just enjoyable in general. And yes, if you like this video, feel free to leave me a comment and tell me what yarn you would have bought from what I've shown you in the footage, and what the yarn stores are like where you live. I'm really excited to know. Do you feel like there's anything missing from the yarn stores in your area? Do you end up ordering online a lot? It's kind of interesting to see what people's yarn shopping habits look like depending on where they live. And I am, yeah, just excited to see you for the next one. Happy knitting. Bye.